Julie, thank you so much for taking the time. It's lovely to be here in your hometown of Queenstown. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Pleasure.
I wonder if we could start, please, with a brief overview from your perspective about the current state of housing as it relates to the communities in the Queenstown Lakes area at this point in time.
Well, I think the best way to start is by looking at our own waiting list, the Community Housing Trust waiting list, which now sits at 1,212 households. So that's not people, that's households. That's literally thousands of people who are on our waiting list seeking some form of housing assistance. That indicates that there's a real issue in this district for not just buying into properties for first home buyers, but also for just securing an affordable and secure 10-year rental property.
Have you noticed a trend or a change over time? Has this become more acute recently, or is it a steady growth that you've observed over time?
Yeah, I think in the last few years it has increased significantly, but particularly post-COVID. So we saw a drop in rental properties or rents around the district during COVID. Obviously, a lot of properties came off to those short-term visitor accommodations, the likes of Airbnb, and they went back into the long-term rental pool. When COVID finished up and the borders reopened, those properties went back onto the short-term visitor accommodation, and our families in the district were left wanting. So we've seen huge demand in the last couple of years.
Can you talk us through your vision of a desired future then? We've talked a little about the current state of the housing that you've got here, but what does a better future look like for you and your communities in the Queenstown Lakes area?
I think it's not dissimilar to Community Housing Aotearoa's vision for all New Zealanders well housed. I think we want the same in this district. We want all members of our community to be well housed, be that through a rental property or assisted ownership or in the private rental market or private ownership. Everyone should have the ability to and have access to affordable and secure 10-year housing.
Yeah, great. And so I suppose the next question from my perspective is, how do we bridge the gap between where we are now and where we want to be, where people are adequately housed? What are some of the mechanisms that you're using in this place, which has got unique characteristics as a housing market because of the tourism, obviously, and the impact that has? What are some of the things you're doing that you feel are working well?
Yeah, well, we've always argued that there's no one silver bullet to the housing issues across the country and in this district. But one mechanism, one tool that we have been using really successfully for 21 years now is inclusionary housing. Used to be known as inclusionary zoning, now we call it inclusionary housing. And essentially that's all about capturing value uplift that is created through the rezoning of land and enabling that to be used for affordable housing in perpetuity through a retention mechanism. And our trust alongside council have been doing this on the ground for 21 years. So it's working really well. We want to see it keep going. We want that plan change to come into the district plan and lock it in the district plan rulebook in perpetuity.
A lot of other community providers around the country will look at you with envy having a inclusionary housing in place, which essentially, can you help me explain it to viewers? It essentially is providing you as the local charitable housing trust with low cost or free land, is that right?
Typically, it's free land. So how it's worked for the last 20 odd years is every time a landowner has gone to council and said, look, we want our land rezoned from rural to residential, and that might be through a private plan change, or it might be through a resource consent or special housing area when that legislation was around, our council has been saying, okay, well, we're happy to do that on behalf of the community who we act for, but if we do that for you and enable that value uplift, we want the community to share in a small amount of that value uplift. And what that has looked like for the last 20 odd years typically is around 5% of new sections that are created in any new development come across to our housing trust, and we retain the value of that contribution in perpetuity.
Fantastic. So you're doing that through a community land trust structure, is that right? It's held in some way?
So we're not actually, we don't call ourselves a community land trust, but we do essentially operate as one. So we receive land and we hold on to it forever. And then we might build homes on it and allocate them either under a rental program or under our assisted ownership model, which is a leasehold model. So the household buys the improvements, the house itself, and we own the land. So in that respect, we do operate like a community land trust.
Yeah, brilliant. And talk to me a little bit about the households who are in your homes, the nature of those people. What are they doing in the community here? Where do they come from? Are they locals? What's the sort of profile of your households?
Well, they're a broad mix because Queenstown Lakes is a really multicultural place for a start. So we have a really diverse range of people in our community. However, to be on our waiting list and to be eligible for housing assistance, you have to have a residency status. So we're not in the business of helping that transient workforce, the seasonal workers. That's not our mandate. We're focused on long-term residents who are committed to the district, wanting to put down roots here. Now we operate broadly across the housing continuum. So we're on one end doing public housing, and the other end doing assisted ownership, and then in between we've got affordable rentals and rent to buy. So the incomes of the households we're helping differ dramatically from those on public housing on very low incomes to those in assisted ownership could be earning up to $130,000 as a gross household income. They would typically be workers. They might be police, teachers, nurses, tradespeople, service workers, hotel workers, the works, if you like. And then you might down the other end, we have quite a few seniors now that we're helping. So they may be on the pension, and others who are on very low incomes, everyone in between.
I'd like to ask a little bit about the resistance and the opposition that you have seen over the last 21 years of running what sounds like an awesome program. There clearly have been periods of well-organised opposition to this. And is it fair to say that's ongoing now as you seek to get this as a permanent fixture in the district plan within the local authority?
Well, that's interesting. I think broadly there's wide support across the community for the trust and the work that we're doing, because we're essentially two small towns, Wanaka and Queenstown, and we've helped hundreds of people now. So most people in the community know someone who's been in a community housing trust house or is in one and understands that that's really important to keeping that household, that family, or it might be a single or couple in the district. So they get it. However, the inclusionary housing aspect is obviously being challenged, particularly by the development community for obvious reasons. It is a financial cost to them that they have to bear, and so therefore you can understand that why they are opposing it. Not all developers are. There are developers out there who over the years have been supportive. I mean, arguably the very first developers who signed a deed in 2003 was done on very much a voluntary basis. So yeah, but as a whole, I think we have wide support for the trust. It's just this inclusionary housing plan change is providing some pushback.
Julie, one of the things we're thinking of at a national level as Community Housing Aotearoa and our Māori, the Māori Voice for Housing Te Matapihi, is pushing quite hard into the government for legislation at a national level in support of what you and your local authority are doing here in Queenstown. It seems from the outside like that would be of assistance if we were hoping to get inclusionary housing up and running in other parts of the country, that there seems to be a nervousness amongst the local authorities. Do you think that would help if we had national legislation in support of it?
That would just be of massive benefit. As well, we have been advocating to central government for many years to bring in central government legislation to enable councils to roll out inclusionary housing rather than having to go through this process of fighting the developers over it. I talk to so many other councils around the country who are really interested in our model, and they're all so keen on inclusionary housing. Not all of them, but those where there's they have high-end properties, and they have an issue with housing their workers. They're very interested in the inclusionary housing model, and so they're certainly waiting to see what will happen with the QLDC's plan change. But if central government could legislate it and pave the way to make it a bit easier, that would be an amazing outcome.
Can you talk us through the risks that would help manage? What are the sort of more technical aspects of the difference that would make for you and for your local authority if there was central legislation in favour of inclusionary housing?
Well, I think the main one would be, so at the moment we've got this plan change variation going through QLDC, and it's anticipated that it will end up in the Environment Court, and that's going to be a cost to QLDC and therefore a cost to the ratepayers. So we would love it if it didn't have to go through that process, if it could be legislated and enabled by central government.
Yeah, so that would just be a higher legal bar, really, wouldn't it, in terms of making it a supported program rather than each local government entity being exposed on its own to legal challenge within its territorial authority.
That's correct.
Talk us through, please, your view on the extent to which the communities here are divided or not divided by whether they own assets or own their homes or don't own their homes. Is that something that you see play out in the community? I've just been reading some news articles and researching for this trip, and it seemed that there were different camps, let me put it that way, and perhaps asset ownership or home ownership was one of the lines in the sand. Is that feel?
Yeah, you mean really that old argument of the haves and the have-nots. We're really starting to see that now. I feel like when our trust was formed in 2007, so 17 years ago, that wasn't such a clear divide, whereas now it really, really is. And I think it's true all around the country, but it's really highlighted in this district where the median house price is 1.7 million. So good luck getting one of those if you're on a gross household income of 70,000, which is the average income on our waiting list. So it's really clear. And, without a capital gains tax, it feels like those haves will just continue to build their wealth, while the have-nots will just continue to pay high rents and pay the mortgages of those lucky few that own the properties. It just doesn't seem fair and equitable, and it doesn't feel like the New Zealand that we all grew up in and we love.
It occurs to me you're in the middle of a process. There's strong potential there may be legal challenges. In my mind, when you describe inclusionary housing, you're talking about a value uplift, a zoning uplift that occurs with the stroke of a pen in local government. And in a way, I question whether that actually is a cost to the developer. I understand it might reduce their margin a little bit, but in many cases, the value of the underlying land with the stroke of a pen, with the zoning change, is a benefit for where it's totally legitimate for the community to capture some of that for our low and moderate income households. If you could speak directly to property developers and the development community here, which I'm sure you did during the hearings, what would be the key message that you'd like to share with them? What would you really like them to understand about what you're doing and why it matters?
Well, I guess that goes back to what you just said, that it really is only a small cost to them compared to the relative cost of that inclusion, of that rezoning process, and that stroke of a pen. Not a sod of soil has turned, but suddenly that land that was zoned as rural is now zoned as residential and worth phenomenally more. So it's about sharing that value with the wider community, because ultimately we all live in the community, and we want these people in the cafes serving us a coffee, or teaching the kids in school, or when we turn up to the hospital we want a doctor and a nurse there. So we need these people in the community. So, my plea to those developers is to share that value uplift that's created through the rezoning process, share a little bit of it with the community for the benefit of all.
Julie, more generally, if we look at inclusionary zoning or inclusionary housing, this is actually not a new idea at all. You are, in some ways, a unicorn in the New Zealand market, But overseas, this is a mainstream activity that has been happening for decades. And it also happens, your proposal is, I believe, at 5%. I've seen documents from over the world where 20, 30, 40, even 50% is the inclusionary housing percentage. Can you talk about any international references that you can think of in terms of more mature inclusionary housing programs and where that's led to other nations and other communities?
Yeah, well, inclusionary housing is really the umbrella term, if you like, and then the mechanics of how it's delivered differ around the world. So our council has opted for that that tool where they say, okay, 5% of the new sections created come across to the trust. Actually, sometimes that has got as high as 10% and even 12.5% on one development. So the standard historically has been 5%, but there is room there to move. However, around the world, say for example in London, what they typically do is, rather than, as I understand, what they do is say 50% of the new buildings and properties that you create have to be affordable, so at a certain price point. So they might not necessarily be transferred to a community land trust or a trust like ourselves, but they might just say, right, 50% have to be at this price point. I know in the States, inclusionary housing falls under other names, and it looks more like a standard fee that's applied to any new development, and that will come across to the local municipality or trust to be held and used for affordable housing. So it does vary across the world.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that that has had a profoundly positive effect on more inclusive, diverse, and thriving communities in those places. So this is, I suppose, for the New Zealand audience, it's important that they know that this is not a radical new concept. It's actually something that's quite widely part of the toolkit, is it fair to say, of options available.
Yeah, look, and a really great example is Aspen in Colorado. So Aspen's actually our sister city, and they're over at the moment, the mayor of Aspen and a few offsiders. And we have been sitting down with them, our mayor, council, a few, there's about 20 of us around the table, and talking about our different issues and solutions. But the issues are incredibly similar. The problems are the same because we're both these tiny little towns within our cities, but these really, really similar issues around housing the workers. However, they have incredible tools in terms of the ability to tax land developers, which has enabled them to build up a huge amount of housing stock for their workers. That's something like, I'd have to look at the numbers, but it is really phenomenal.
Julie, there's been an explosion, if I could use that word, of NIMBYism directed at the likes of Kāinga Ora, the state provider of social housing in various communities across the country, and expressions of concern around ghettos, or to use an unpleasant word. How do you manage the composition of communities when you are deciding on the placement of the homes that you're building within a broader context? What does that look like?
Yeah, and look, that is a legitimate fear for communities who have never had a community housing in their area before. However, we have come across that, and certainly that was something that we dealt with 17 years ago when we first started building developments. And one of the things that we're really proud of is that we build mixed tenure developments. So a really great example is the Toru apartments in Frankton. So these are 6-storey, high density, small 1 and 2 bed apartments. They were created by a private developer. However, we purchased 50 of them, 50 of the 78, and we've retained 42 of those. 15 of them are in public housing, and the remainder are in our assisted ownership program. Now, the remainder of those properties, which is about 30 odd, are in the free market. So they might be free market rentals, or they might be first home buyers. And that's great. And that you can walk down the corridors of that apartment block and you won't know if the door opens up to a public housing tenant or a first home buyer. And that's a true mixed tenure model, and that gets communities mixing with each other. It creates a really good outcome. There's so much evidence around the world that mixed tenure communities provide really positive outcomes.
Yeah, great. So it's really nice to hear in a high density situation, even because that's the most extreme expression of mixed tenure potentially, isn't it? When you're really literally on top of each other.
That's right.
Um, Julie, would you mind just mentioning some of your projects and your communities that you've participated in this region? Where are you and where are your families living?
Well, that's again one of the fortuitous things of inclusionary housing is that we're spread throughout the district. Where a new subdivision occurs, you will likely find us there. And so we've built over the years, I think we've built about 10, completed 10 different development projects of varying scales. We have got homes we built our very first development in Lake Hayes Estate, one called Nearan Square. I think you'll be paying a visit to there. That's a true comprehensive development, mixed tenure. We built 44 homes in Shotover Country and then another 6 in the same area a few years later. We built 10 homes in Arrowtown on land that we received from council, and we've got another 68 lot development on the edges of Arrowtown happening at the moment. Again, on land that we received from council for $1. The value of that land was $10 million, so a significant contribution from council. And one that other councils around the country, if they're looking to do affordable housing and house their workers, could be thinking about what excess land have they got, right? They should be looking at this as an example of how you can go about it, partnering up with a local chip to provide community housing. And also over in Wanaka, we've got a heap over in Wanaka as well. We've got a 28 lot development underway in Hawea, Lake Hawea. And we've got 2 homes underway in Mount Cardrona, which is actually a resort zone, but they'll be contributing land there and we'll be building and housing people there.
Busy times indeed. And how many people did you say you have on your households on your waiting list?
1,212.
Goodness me. So that's a big long pipeline to address that. How do you feel the future looks in terms of that future pipeline and your ability to continue to meet that persistent housing need?
Well, it's very much reliant on inclusionary housing going through, the plan change going through, and that will give us that pipeline of housing that we need to keep fit to building the homes to service these people. It's also very much reliant on central government funding. So we've obviously got a new government in place now, the coalition, and we haven't had any clear direction on housing policy at this stage. So we're waiting with bated breath to see what housing policy they are going to deliver to the chip sector, because unfortunately it's really, really challenging to build affordable housing without providing some sort of subsidy, be that the land from developers through the inclusionary housing process or local government providing land or central government providing some subsidy. And that might be under the progressive home ownership loan, which has worked really well over the last few years, or public housing, or for affordable rentals. There's a whole heap of tools that can be used to help chips around the country deliver housing.
Yeah, and I think in summary, it's almost about pulling all the levers, isn't it? There's no silver bullet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, look, my mind goes back to periods of New Zealand history where we were the envy of the world with our housing policy as a broad-based home-owning democracy. What do you think the implications are for us as New Zealanders, civil society, if we don't focus and continue to address the substantial and persistent unmet housing needs we have in our communities in New Zealand?
Well, you would hate to think that we would end up in a position like some of those second and third world countries where the people start revolting because they just are really, really desperate and unhappy and do not have the finances to carry on with life effectively. You know, we already started to see about a year ago, this time a year ago, we started to see a lot more people sleeping in tents and their cars down by the lake in dock camping grounds. And it's really unpleasant. And the community was deeply unhappy about this happening. So this is going to happen again. And winters, we're getting down to well below 0 degrees. So we don't want people sleeping in their cars. You know, I would be taking my dogs for a bike ride in the morning down by the lake, and you go past all these cars and there's tradies worker boots outside the front door and they're sleeping in there. It's not what we want, and it's not a healthy community to have that happening. So I think it's really important that we find a way to house people sufficiently.
Julie, I think on behalf of New Zealand, we want to thank you. You're a beacon of hope here in the Queenstown Lakes District in terms of inclusionary housing. And we remain really hopeful that we can spread the magic that you've created here over the last 21 years more widely across the country. And so just wanted to say thanks so much for what you're doing and what you're continuing to do. And we're with you and backing you as you seek to get it permanently put into the local plan. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. And obviously, when you say thank me, the thanks really lies with the local council, who's the one who's been doing this for 21 years and pushing through with the plan change. Our trust is just the lucky recipient out the other end, making it all happen, turning it into housing and housing people.
Yeah, visionary leadership. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Julie.